Story 1. The Drumheller Watcher. My name is Marcus, and this happened 3 years ago when I was 26 and working as a paleontology research assistant in Drumheller, Alberta. I'd rented a small house on the outskirts of town, one of those old 1970s builds that sat about half a mile from the nearest neighbor. It seemed perfect for someone who needed quiet to work on field reports. Little did I know, quiet wasn't all I'd be getting. The house was pretty standard for the area. Single story, vinyl siding, a gravel driveway that connected to a dirt road. The landlord, an older guy named Tom, mentioned the previous tenant had left suddenly but didn't elaborate. I brushed it off at first. People move all the time, right? I moved in mid-September, and for the first 2 weeks, everything seemed fine. I'd come home from the dig site around 6, make dinner, work on my reports until midnight, then sleep. The first time I noticed something was off was when I came home on a Thursday evening. It was around 6:15 p.m., still light out. I pulled into the driveway and saw that my living room curtain was pulled back slightly, like someone had been looking out. I lived alone. I told myself it was probably nothing. Maybe the wind. Maybe I'd left it that way in the morning and just didn't remember. But I remember thinking it was weird, because I'm pretty particular about closing all the curtains before I leave. That night, I was working at my desk in the spare bedroom I'd converted into an office. It was around 11:30 p.m. The house was quiet except for the hum of my laptop. Then I heard it. Footsteps on the gravel driveway. Slow, deliberate steps. Crunch, crunch, crunch. I froze and listened. The steps stopped right outside my office window. I waited maybe 30 seconds, then got up and looked through the blinds. Nothing. Just darkness and the empty driveway lit by the single floodlight I had mounted above the garage. I tried to convince myself that it was probably a deer or a coyote. The area had wildlife, but the steps had sounded too heavy, too rhythmic. But then it happened again. 3 nights later, same time, same sound. Footsteps on gravel, stopping at different windows. This time they stopped at my bedroom window. I was already in bed, lights off, trying to sleep. I heard the crunch of gravel, then nothing. Then I heard something else, breathing. Heavy breathing, just on the other side of the glass. I felt my whole body tense up. I didn't move. I barely breathed. After what felt like 5 minutes but was probably only 30 seconds, the footsteps moved away. The next morning, I checked outside. There were boot prints in the dirt below my bedroom window. Size looked like a men's 10 or 11. I called the RCMP non-emergency line. An officer came out that afternoon, took photos, filed a report. He said they'd increased patrols in the area but that it was probably just some kids messing around. I wanted to believe him. I started noticing a pattern. Every 3 or 4 nights, around the same time, between 11 p.m. and midnight, the footsteps would return. Sometimes they'd circle the house. Sometimes they'd stop at one window for several minutes. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I bought motion sensor lights and installed them around the perimeter. I figured if someone was coming around, at least I'd see them. And then things went from a 3 to an 8. It was a cold October night, probably around 2 degrees Celsius. I was in the kitchen making tea around 11:45 p.m. when all 3 motion lights clicked on at once. I froze and looked out the kitchen window. Standing at the edge of my property, maybe 40 feet away, was a figure. Just standing there. Tall, wearing what looked like a dark jacket and jeans. I couldn't make out the face because they were backlit by one of the floodlights. I grabbed my phone and called 911. While I was on the line with the dispatcher, I watched the figure. It didn't move. Just stood there for a solid 2 minutes. Then, slowly, it raised one arm and pointed at the house. At me. My heart dropped. The dispatcher said officers were en route. ETA 10 minutes. I stayed on the line. The figure turned and walked away into the darkness, disappearing beyond the reach of the lights. The RCMP arrived about Then I heard something else, scratching. Not like an animal. like fingernails or something metal scraping against the door. It went on for maybe 20 seconds. Then it stopped. The footsteps moved to the living room window. I was sitting on the couch, frozen. My curtains were closed, but I knew whoever this was knew I was in there. Then I heard a voice. Low, muffled through the window. It said, "I can see you." My lungs locked up. I couldn't breathe. The footsteps moved away, back down the driveway, and faded into the night. That was unsettling, but what happened next was even worse. At that point, I was on edge, but I wasn't prepared for what came next. The following night, I checked the security camera footage from the front door. I went back to the previous night, to the timestamp when I'd heard the scratching. The video showed exactly what I'd feared. A figure, tall, wearing a hoodie pulled low, standing at my door, trying the handle, scratching at the wood with what looked like a key or a nail. But what made my blood run cold was what happened next in the footage. The figure stopped scratching and turned to face the camera directly. They stood there for 10 seconds, just staring up at the lens. Then they waved. A slow, deliberate wave. Like they knew I'd be watching this later. Like they wanted me to know they knew about the camera. I forwarded the footage to the RCMP immediately. Corporal Davies came back out the next day. He watched it, took a copy, said they'd try to identify the person but that the hoodie and poor lighting made it difficult. He strongly suggested I find somewhere else to stay. He said they had reports of similar activity in the area over the past 2 years. Someone watching houses, prowling properties, but never breaking in. They'd never caught the person. I asked him why no one had told me this when I'd first called. He said they hadn't wanted to alarm me unnecessarily, thought maybe it was a coincidence. But now it was clear I was being targeted. He said the previous tenant, the one who'd left suddenly, had reported the same thing. Footsteps, someone watching, someone trying the doors. And then things went from an 8 to a 10. It was exactly 1 week later. I'd been staying at a motel in town for 3 nights, but I needed to go back to the house to grab some more clothes and equipment. I drove out there in the middle of the day, figuring it was safe. It was bright, sunny, about 2 p.m. on a Saturday. I pulled up to the house and immediately knew something was wrong. The front door was ajar. Not wide open, just cracked about 2 inches. I know I'd locked it. I sat in my truck for a minute, debating whether to go in or call the police. I called. Corporal Davies said he'd send someone, but it would be about 20 minutes. I said I'd wait in my truck, but curiosity got the better of me. After about 5 minutes, I got out and approached the house. I pushed the door open slowly with my foot. "Hello." No response. I stepped inside. The living room looked normal. Nothing disturbed. I walked through to the kitchen. Also fine. Then I went to the bedroom. On my bed, arranged neatly, were items from around my house. My laptop from the office. A jacket from the closet. A coffee mug from the kitchen. A framed photo of my family from the living room bookshelf. And in the center of it all, a note. Handwritten on lined paper. It said, "I've been in here before. You never knew." I felt my hands start shaking. I backed out of the room and went outside to wait for the RCMP. When they arrived, they processed the scene, dusted for prints, took the note. They found no signs of forced entry. Whoever had come in had a key, or knew how to pick the lock. Corporal Davies told me something then that made everything worse. He said they suspected this was the same person who'd been doing this to houses in the area for years. Sometimes they'd just watch. Sometimes they'd break in when people were away and move things around, leave notes, let the residents know they'd been there. They'd never hurt anyone physically, but the psychological impact was severe. 3 families had moved away in the past 5 years because of it. I didn't even go back inside to pack. I told the landlord I was breaking my lease. I'd forfeit my deposit. I didn't care. I moved my stuff out the next day with 2 friends helping me, and I left Drumheller. I moved back to Calgary and found a new job. The RCMP never identified the person. To this day, I still don't know who it was or why they targeted me. Part of me wishes I knew, but another part is glad I don't. I still get chills when I think about that note. I've been in here before. You never knew. I'll never forget that. I never went back to Drumheller. I can't. Story 2. The Medicine Hat basement. My name is Vanessa, and this happened back in 2019 when I was 22 and renting a basement suite in Medicine Hat. I just graduated from college and got a job at a local marketing firm, so I needed something cheap while I saved up. The suite was in an older house on the south side of town, owned by a woman named Linda who lived upstairs with her teenage son. It seemed fine. Cheap rent, utilities included, and Linda seemed nice enough. What started as a convenient living situation quickly became something I'd rather forget. The basement suite was pretty typical. 1 bedroom, small bathroom, a combined kitchen and living area. Concrete floors with cheap laminate over top, drop ceiling with fluorescent lights, small windows near the ceiling that let in some natural light. The place was a bit dingy but clean enough. Linda had mentioned the previous tenant had only stayed 4 months before moving out for work, she said. I didn't think much of it. I moved in on a Friday in late March. The first week was fine. I'd come home from work, make dinner, watch Netflix, normal stuff. The suite was quiet, which I appreciated. Sometimes I'd hear footsteps from upstairs, Linda or her son walking around, but nothing unusual. The first time I noticed something was off was about 2 weeks in. It was a Tuesday night, around 10 p.m. I was lying in bed scrolling through my phone when I heard a sound. A faint scratching noise coming from somewhere in the suite. I looked up and listened. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Rhythmic, like fingernails on drywall. I figured it was probably mice in the walls. Old house, bound to have some pests. I texted Linda about it the next morning. She said she'd have an exterminator come check it out. He came 3 days later, checked all the usual spots, said he didn't find any evidence of mice or rats. No droppings, no nesting materials, nothing. He set a couple traps just in case and left. I told myself maybe I'd imagined it, or maybe it was pipe settling, something normal. But then it happened again. A week later, same time, around 10 p.m., same sound. Scratching. This time it was louder, more insistent, and it was definitely coming from the wall behind my bed. I got up and pressed my ear against it. The scratching stopped immediately. I waited. Nothing. I went back to bed. As soon as I turned off the light, it started again. I couldn't sleep that night. The scratching would start and stop randomly. Sometimes it sounded like it was moving through the walls. I tried to ignore it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The next morning, I was exhausted. I texted Linda again, told her the scratching was back and worse. She said she'd come down and listen that night. Linda came down around 9:30 p.m. We sat in the living area and waited. Sure enough, at 10:07 p.m., the scratching started. Linda heard it too. Her face went pale. She said, "That's not mice." I asked her what she thought it was. She didn't answer right away. Then she said, "I don't know, but I'll have someone come look at the walls." A contractor came out 2 days later. He cut small inspection holes in the drywall in my bedroom, shined a flashlight inside. Nothing. No signs of animals, no damage, nothing that would explain the sound. He patched the holes and left. Linda apologized, said she'd reduce my rent for the inconvenience. I appreciated it, but I was more concerned about what was making that sound. I started noticing a pattern. The scratching only happened at night, usually between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. It was always in the walls, but it seemed to move. One night it would be behind my bed. The next night it would be in the living area wall. Then the bathroom. It was like whatever was making the sound was moving through the space between the walls. I tried to ignore it, but each time, it got a little worse. After about 3 weeks of this, I was barely sleeping. I'd lie awake listening, waiting for it to start. And it always did. One night I decided to try something. When the scratching started, I knocked on the wall 3 times. Hard. The scratching stopped. Then, after about 5 seconds, I heard 3 knocks back. Same rhythm. Same intensity. My heart dropped. That wasn't mice. That wasn't pipes. Something was responding to me. I grabbed my phone and called Linda. It was almost 11 p.m., but I didn't care. She answered, groggy. I told her what happened. She was silent for a moment, then said she'd come down. She came down in her bathrobe, looking worried. I told her to knock on the wall. She did. 3 knocks. We waited. Nothing. She looked at me like maybe I was imagining things. Then we heard it. 3 knocks back. From inside the wall. Linda's face went white. She said, "Oh my God." I asked her what was going on. She sat down on my couch and told me something she'd kept from me. The previous tenant hadn't left for work. They'd left because of the scratching. And the tenant before that. Linda had owned the house for 6 years, and in that time, she'd had 4 tenants in the basement suite. None of them stayed longer than 6 months. They all complained about the same thing: scratching in the walls, sounds at night, feeling like they were being watched. I asked her why she didn't tell me this before I moved in. She said she thought maybe it was just coincidence, that maybe the tenants were all just paranoid or hearing things. But now she couldn't deny it. Something was happening in that basement suite. And then things went from unsettling to terrifying. It was 3 nights after Linda told me about the previous tenants. I was lying in bed, lights off, trying to sleep. The scratching started again, but this time it was different. It wasn't coming from the walls. It was coming from under my bed. I froze. I didn't move. I barely breathed. The scratching was loud now, deliberate. Scratch, 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 right beneath me. Then it stopped, and I heard something else. A voice. Faint, muffled, but definitely a voice. It said something I couldn't make out. Then it said it again, clearer this time. Get out. I felt my lungs lock up. I couldn't breathe. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand, turned on the flashlight, and shined it under the bed. Nothing. Just the floor. But the voice spoke again. Get out. I bolted. I didn't even grab my shoes. I ran out of the bedroom, through the suite, up the stairs to Linda's door. I pounded on it. She opened it, saw my face, and pulled me inside. I was shaking, crying, trying to explain what happened. She called the police. 2 officers arrived about 15 minutes later. They searched the basement suite thoroughly. Checked under the bed, in the closets, in the bathroom, everywhere. Nothing. No one. One of the officers asked if I'd been drinking or using any substances. I said no. He suggested maybe I'd had a nightmare. I insisted I'd been awake. Linda told them about the history of the suite, the previous tenants, the scratching. The officers exchanged looks. One of them said they'd had similar calls from this address over the years but had never found anything. He suggested Linda might want to have the house inspected for structural issues, or maybe even consider having someone come in to check for carbon monoxide or other environmental factors that might cause hallucinations. I didn't go back down to the suite that night. I slept on Linda's couch. The next morning, I told her I was moving out. She understood. She said she wouldn't charge me for breaking the lease. I packed up my stuff that day with Linda and her son helping me. I wouldn't go into the suite alone. I moved in with a friend temporarily and found a new place 2 weeks later. Linda ended up selling the house about 6 months after I moved out. I heard through mutual friends that she disclosed everything to the buyers, and they'd had the basement suite sealed off, walls reinforced, entrance boarded up. I don't know if that helped. I don't know what was in those walls or under that floor. To this day, I still don't know what I heard. But I'll never forget that voice. I never went back. I still get chills when I think about it. Story 3. The Fort McLeod hitchhiker. This story happened 2 years ago around late autumn 2022. My name is Ryan, and I was driving back from a camping trip in Waterton Lakes National Park to my home in Lethbridge. It was a Sunday night, around 9:30 p.m, and I was taking Highway 2 through Fort McLeod. The road was empty, dark except for my headlights. What seemed like a simple drive home turned into something I'll never forget. I'd been driving for about 40 minutes when I saw someone standing on the shoulder of the highway just outside Fort McLeod. A figure, thumb out, clearly hitchhiking. Now, I don't normally pick up hitchhikers. My dad always warned me against it. But it was cold that night, probably around -5°C, and this person looked like they needed help. I slowed down and pulled over. As I got closer, I could see it was a man, probably in his 40s or 50s, wearing a jean jacket and jeans. No hat, no gloves. He looked cold. I rolled down my passenger window and asked if he needed a ride. He nodded and said, "Just to town. I'd appreciate it." His voice was rough, tired. I told him to get in. He opened the door and slid into the passenger seat. Up close, I could see his face better. Weathered, with deep lines around his eyes. He smelled like cigarettes and something else I couldn't place. Damp earth, maybe. He buckled his seatbelt and said, "Thanks." Car broke down a few miles back. I asked him if he'd called for help. He said his phone was dead. I pulled back onto the highway and headed toward Fort McLeod. The town was only about 5 minutes away. We drove in silence for the first minute or two. I tried to make small talk, asked him where he was headed. He said, "Just need to get to town. Got people there." Something about the way he said it felt off, but I brushed it off at first. Then I noticed something strange. The air in the car had gotten colder. I could see my breath. I checked the heater. It was on, set to 22 degrees. But it felt like the temperature had dropped 10 degrees in the past minute. I looked over at the hitchhiker. He was staring straight ahead, not moving. I asked him if he was okay. He didn't respond. I tried again. "Hey, you all right?" Nothing. He just sat there, staring. Then, slowly, he turned his head toward me. His eyes were dark, almost black in the dim light of the car. He smiled. Not a friendly smile. Something else. Something wrong. He said, "You shouldn't have stopped." My heart started racing. I asked him what he meant. He didn't answer. He just kept staring at me with that smile. I told myself maybe he was just messing with me, trying to be weird. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. I could see the lights of Fort McLeod ahead, maybe 2 minutes away. I decided I'd drop him off at the first gas station I saw and get the hell out of there. But then things escalated. The hitchhiker reached over and put his hand on my shoulder. His grip was cold, ice cold, even through my jacket. I flinched and told him to let go. He didn't. He said, "Do you know where you are?" I told him yes. We were almost in Fort McLeod. He shook his head slowly. "No. Do you know where you really are?" I didn't understand what he meant. I was getting scared now. I told him again to let go of me. He squeezed harder. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. "I died here. Right here on this road. 3 years ago." I looked at him, my hands gripping the steering wheel. I asked him what he was talking about. He said, "Car accident. Just outside town. I've been here ever since. Waiting." I didn't know what to say. Part of me thought maybe he was mentally ill, or high on something. But another part of me, the part that felt the freezing air, that saw the darkness in his eyes, knew something else was happening. I told him I was sorry about his accident, but I needed him to let go of me. He did. Slowly, he pulled his hand back. And then things went from a 6 to a 10. We entered Fort McLeod, and I pulled into the parking lot of a Shell station that was still open. I put the car in park and turned to tell him this was his stop. But he was gone. The passenger seat was empty. The seatbelt was still buckled, hanging loose. The door was closed. He'd vanished. I felt my whole body tense up. I looked around the car, checked the back seat. Nothing. I got out and looked around the parking lot. No one. I walked into the gas station, asked the clerk if they'd seen anyone come in the last minute. They said no, I was the only customer. I described the hitchhiker. The clerk's face went pale. They said, "You saw him too." I asked what they meant. They told me other people had reported picking up a hitchhiker on that stretch of highway, always outside Fort McLeod, always late at night. The hitchhiker would get in, talk for a bit, then disappear. Some people said he'd tell them he died there. Others said he'd just vanish without a word. The clerk pulled out a newspaper clipping from behind the counter. It was from November 2019. A man had been killed in a single-vehicle accident on Highway 2 just outside Fort McLeod. His car had hit a patch of black ice and rolled. He'd died at the scene. The photo in the article showed the man. It was him. The hitchhiker I'd picked up. I felt nauseous. I asked the clerk why this was happening. They shrugged and said some people thought his spirit was trapped there, trying to get home. Others thought maybe he didn't know he was dead. I didn't know what to believe. All I knew was I'd just given a ride to a dead man. I got back in my car and drove home to Lethbridge. I didn't stop. I kept checking the passenger seat the entire drive, half expecting to see him sitting there again. But he never reappeared. I made it home around 11 p.m. and didn't sleep that night. The next day, I looked up the accident online. Found more details. The man's name was David Callahan. He'd been 48 years old, worked construction, had a wife and 2 kids. He'd been driving home from a job site when the accident happened. They'd found his body the next morning. I never drove that stretch of highway at night again. I take a different route now, even though it adds 20 minutes to the trip. To this day, I still don't know if what I experienced was real or if my mind was playing tricks on me. But I remember his face, his voice, the cold in the car. I'll never forget it. I still get chills when I think about it. Part of me wishes I knew why he's still there, but another part is glad I don't. Story 4. The Tabba storage unit. My name is Jenna, and this happened last year when I was helping my uncle clean out a storage unit in Tabba. He'd inherited it from my grandfather, who passed away in 2021, and it had been sitting untouched for almost 2 years. My uncle lived in Edmonton and asked if I'd go check it out since I lived closer in Lethbridge. I figured it would be a quick job, grab anything important, sort through the junk, maybe make a couple $100 for my time. It seemed straightforward until I actually got inside. The storage facility was on the east side of Tabba, one of those older U-lock places with outdoor units. The kind where you drive up, unlock the roll-up door, and load your stuff. I met my uncle there on a Saturday morning in May, around 10 a.m. The sun was out, temperature was pleasant, probably around 15 degrees. Normal day. My uncle had the key and the unit number, 47, near the back of the facility. We drove over in separate vehicles. The place was pretty empty, maybe 3 or 4 other people there loading or unloading their units. We found and my uncle unlocked the padlock. He rolled up the door and we both stopped and stared. The unit was packed. Floor to ceiling, wall to wall, with boxes, furniture, old equipment. My grandfather had been a contractor and apparently he'd been storing his work stuff here along with personal items. I remember thinking this was going to take way longer than I'd planned. My uncle said he had to get back to Edmonton that afternoon and asked if I could handle sorting through it myself over the next few days. He'd pay me $500. I said sure. At first, everything seemed fine. I spent that Saturday pulling out boxes, going through them, making piles, keep, donate, trash. Most of it was tools, old blueprints, construction materials. Some personal stuff, photo albums, my grandfather's old clothes, paperwork. Nothing unusual. The first time I noticed something was off was when I found a box near the back of the unit. It was different from the others, newer, clean, sealed with duct tape. The other boxes were old, dusty, some falling apart. This one looked like it had been put there recently. I thought maybe my uncle had stored something there and forgot about it. I pulled it out and set it aside. I was going to ask him about it, but he'd already left for Edmonton. I figured I'd just open it and see what was inside. I used my keys to cut through the tape and open the box. Inside were photographs. Hundreds of them. All of the same place, the storage unit. Photos of the inside of the unit from different angles, different times of day based on the lighting. Some were from years ago based on how full or empty the unit was. But what made me uneasy was that some of the photos seemed recent. Very recent. Like within the past few weeks. I could see items I recognized from sorting earlier that day. The boxes were in the same positions. I told myself maybe my uncle had taken these, documenting what was there before having me clean it out. But that didn't make sense. Why would he need hundreds of photos? And why seal them in a box inside the unit? I brushed it off and kept working. I spent another 3 hours sorting and ended up making good progress. I locked up around 2 p.m. and went home. That night, I texted my uncle and asked him about the box of photos. He said he had no idea what I was talking about. He'd never taken photos of the unit. He asked me to send him pictures of what I found. I drove back the next morning, Sunday, around 9 a.m. to continue working. When I pulled up to unit, something felt wrong. The padlock was still on, still locked, but the door was rolled up about 6 inches from the bottom. Just enough to see into the unit. I got out of my car and approached slowly. I called out, "Hello? Anyone in there?" No response. I unlocked the padlock and rolled the door up fully. My stomach dropped. The boxes I'd organized the day before, the neat piles of keep, donate, and trash, were all over the place. Boxes were opened, contents dumped out, things scattered everywhere. It looked like someone had gone through everything in a panic. I stood there for a minute trying to process what I was seeing. I pulled out my phone and called my uncle. I told him what happened. He said he'd call the storage facility and report a break-in. He asked if anything looked stolen. I walked through the unit checking. As far as I could tell, nothing was missing. Just disturbed. The facility manager came over about 20 minutes later. She checked the security cameras. They didn't cover every unit, and wasn't in view of any camera. She said she'd file a report, but there wasn't much they could do. She offered to change the lock. I said yes. I spent the rest of that day reorganizing and trying to continue the cleanup. I was on edge the entire time, jumping at every sound. By 4 p.m. I'd had enough and left. That night I couldn't stop thinking about those photos. Who took them? Why? And who had broken into the unit? Monday morning I got a text from my uncle. He said the facility had reviewed all their security footage from the weekend. No one had been near our unit except me. No vehicles, no people walking around that area. Nothing. But someone had clearly been inside. The manager suggested maybe I'd left it messier than I remembered. I knew that wasn't true. I didn't want to go back, but I'd committed to finishing the job and I needed the money. I drove out Tuesday afternoon, around 1 p.m. The new lock was on. I opened it and rolled up the door. Everything looked the way I'd left it Monday. That was a relief. I went back to work. I was about an hour in, kneeling in the back corner going through a box of old electrical supplies, when I heard the door roll down behind me. My heart jumped. I stood up quickly and turned around. The door was closed. The light from outside was gone. I was in complete darkness. I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight. I walked to the door and tried to roll it up. It wouldn't budge. I pushed harder. Nothing. It felt like something was holding it down from the outside. I started yelling, "Hey, I'm in here. Open the door." No response. I called 911. I told them I was locked inside a storage unit. They said they'd send someone. I waited. 5 minutes. 10 minutes. I kept trying the door, pounding on it, yelling. After about 15 minutes, I heard footsteps outside. Then voices. The door rolled up. It was the facility manager and a police officer. They asked me what happened. I explained. The officer asked if I'd locked the door myself by accident. I said no. I'd been inside the unit when it closed. The manager checked the door mechanism. She said sometimes the springs can malfunction and the door can fall shut on its own. But she'd never heard of one that couldn't be opened from the inside. The officer looked at me like he thought maybe I was confused about what happened. They left. I was shaken, but I tried to keep working. I lasted another 30 minutes before I decided I was done for the day. I'd come back tomorrow and finish up. I rolled the door down, locked it, and left. On the drive home, I noticed something in my rearview mirror. A car was following me. Black sedan, older model, maybe early 2000s. It stayed behind me the entire drive back to Lethbridge. When I pulled into my apartment complex, it drove past. I told myself it was just coincidence, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. That night, I went through the photos from the box again. I'd taken them home with me to show my uncle. As I looked at them more closely, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. In several of the photos, if you looked carefully at the reflection in the metal door frame, you could see a figure. Someone standing outside the unit taking the photos. The image was blurry, but they were wearing dark clothes. And they were there in multiple photos taken at different times. Someone had been watching that unit for a long time. And now they knew I was there. And then things went from unsettling to terrifying. The next day, Wednesday, I went back to finish the job. I wanted to get this over with. I arrived around noon, unlocked the unit, rolled up the door. Everything was as I'd left it. I worked quickly, trying not to think about the photos or the door closing or the car that had followed me. I was almost done, maybe 30 minutes from finishing, when I found another box. Same as the first, newer, clean, sealed with tape. This one was hidden under a top in the very back corner. I had a bad feeling about opening it, but I did anyway. Inside were more photos. But these weren't of the storage unit. These were of me. Photos of me from the past 3 days. Me arriving at the facility. Me sorting through boxes. Me loading things into my car. Me at my apartment. The most recent one was from that morning. Me walking from my car to my apartment building before I'd left for Tabba. My hands were shaking as I looked through them. There were at least 50 photos. Whoever took these had been following me. Watching me. 4 days. I felt my whole body tense up as I realized someone was standing right outside the unit. I could sense them. I turned around slowly. A figure stood in the doorway, backlit by the afternoon sun. Tall, wearing dark clothes. They didn't say anything. They just stood there. I asked who they were. No response. I told them to leave or I'd call the police. They took a step forward into the unit. That's when it happened. I grabbed my phone and bolted. I ran past them, out of the unit, to my car. I fumbled with my keys, got in, locked the doors. The figure walked out of the unit slowly and stood there watching me. I started my car and peeled out of the parking lot. I looked in my rearview mirror. They were walking toward a black sedan, the same one that had followed me. I called 911 as I drove. I told them everything. The photos, the break-ins, the person at the storage unit, the car following me. They said they'd send officers to my apartment to meet me there. I drove straight home, keeping an eye on my mirrors the whole way. The black sedan didn't follow me this time. 2 officers met me at my apartment. I showed them the photos. They took them as evidence and said they'd investigate. They asked if I recognized the person at the storage unit. I said no. They offered to have an officer patrol my area that night. I said yes. I called my uncle and told him I was done. I wasn't going back to that storage unit. He understood. He said he'd hire a professional company to finish the cleanout. I never found out who was watching me or why. The police investigated but never identified the person. The storage facility checked all their records but found no suspicious activity logged. I moved to a different apartment complex 2 months later. I still look over my shoulder everywhere I go. To this day, I won't go near Tabba. I'll never forget those photos of me. Someone had been that close, watching me, and I never knew. I still get chills when I think about it. Story 5. The Pincher Creek Motel. This story happened 3 years ago in the winter of 2021. My name is Andrew, and I was traveling through southern Alberta for work as a medical equipment sales rep. I'd been on the road for 2 weeks, driving from town to town, meeting with clinics and hospitals. It was mid-January, freezing cold, and I was exhausted. I needed to stop for the night, and Pincher Creek was the closest town. Little did I know, I should have kept driving. I pulled into town around 8 p.m. It was snowing lightly, temperature probably around -20. Most places were closed for the night. I found a small motel on the main strip, the Chinook Motor Inn. One of those old single-story places with rooms that opened directly to the outside parking lot. The neon vacancy sign was flickering. I parked and went into the office. An older man was behind the desk, probably in his 60s, watching TV. He looked up when I walked in and asked if I needed a room. I said yes, just for one night. He quoted me $65 cash only. I paid and he handed me a key, an actual metal key, not a key card, for room 12. He said it was at the far end. I thanked him and went to find it. Room 12 was the last unit, right at the corner of the building. I unlocked the door and went inside. The room was basic, double bed, small TV, bathroom, mini fridge. It smelled like cigarette smoke and cheap air freshener. The carpet was old and stained, but it was warm and I was tired, so I didn't care. I dropped my bags, took a shower, and settled in for the night. I ordered pizza from a place nearby that was still open and ate while watching TV. Around 10:30 p.m., I decided to call it a night. I turned off the TV, turned off the lights, and got into bed. The first time I noticed something was off was around midnight. I woke up to a sound. Footsteps outside my door. Slow, deliberate footsteps pacing back and forth. I figured it was probably another guest or someone from the front desk making rounds. I tried to ignore it and go back to sleep. But the footsteps didn't stop. They kept pacing. Back and forth. 4-5 minutes straight. I started to feel uneasy. I got up and looked through the peephole in the door. The parking lot light was on outside, but I couldn't see anyone. The footsteps stopped. I went back to bed. About 20 minutes later, I heard something else. A knock on my door. 3 soft knocks. I looked at my phone. 12:47 a.m. I called out, "Who is it?" No response. Another 3 knocks. I got up and looked through the peephole again. No one there. I told myself maybe it was kids messing around or someone had the wrong room. I went back to bed, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I lay there in the dark, listening. For about 10 minutes, nothing. Then I heard the door handle turn. Slowly. Testing the lock. I froze. My heart was racing. The door was locked. I'd made sure of that. But someone was trying to get in. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight. The handle stopped moving. I waited. Nothing. I called the front desk. No answer. I tried again. Still no answer. I decided I wasn't going to sleep. I got dressed and sat on the bed with my phone in hand, ready to call 911 if needed. I waited for something else to happen. Around 1:30 a.m., I heard voices outside. Muffled, like people were talking right outside my door. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but there were definitely multiple voices. I looked through the peephole. Still no one there. This continued for the next hour. Footsteps. Knocks. Voices. The door handle turning. But every time I looked, there was no one there. I was exhausted and scared and I just wanted morning to come so I could leave. At around 2:45 a.m., things escalated. I heard scratching on the door. Not like an animal, like fingernails or something metal scraping the wood. It went on for maybe 30 seconds. Then it stopped. Then I heard breathing. Heavy breathing right outside the door, like someone had their face pressed against it. I called 911. I told the dispatcher someone was trying to get into my room at the motel. They said they'd send an officer. I stayed on the line. The breathing stopped. About 10 minutes later, I saw red and blue lights through the window. A police cruiser pulled into the parking lot. I opened the door. An RCMP officer was standing there. I explained what had been happening. He walked around the perimeter of the building with his flashlight, checked the parking lot. He came back and said he didn't see anyone. He asked if I'd been drinking or if I had any medical conditions that might cause hallucinations. I said no. He suggested maybe it was the wind or sounds from other rooms traveling through the walls. Old motels can be noisy, he said. I told him I knew what I heard. He said he'd file a report, but there wasn't much else he could do if no one was there. He offered to check with the front desk. We walked over together. The office was locked, lights off. The officer knocked. No answer. He said the owner probably went home for the night. He asked if I wanted to switch rooms or if I felt unsafe staying. I said I'd just leave. He waited while I grabbed my bags from room 12. I checked out by sliding the key under the office door and drove to the next town, Clairsham, where I found a different motel. The next morning, I called the Chinook motor in to tell them what happened. An older woman answered, said she was the owner. I explained the situation. There was a long pause. Then she said, "You were in room 12." I said yes. She sighed and said, "I'm sorry. I told my husband not to rent that room anymore." I asked what she meant. She told me room 12 had a history. Several guests over the past 5 years had reported the same things: footsteps, knocking, voices, someone trying to get in. The RCMP had been called multiple times. They'd never found anyone. Some people thought it was haunted. Others thought maybe someone was hiding in the crawl space under the building and messing with guests. They'd had the room inspected, the crawl space checked, even had someone come in to do some kind of spiritual cleansing. Nothing helped. Eventually, they decided to stop renting it out, but her husband had recently started renting it again because they needed the money. She apologized and offered to refund me. I said it was fine. I just wanted to let her know. She said they'd take room 12 off the rental list permanently. I never went back to Pincher Creek. To this day, I still don't know what I experienced that night. Whether it was paranormal or someone actually messing with me, I'll never know. But I'll never forget that feeling of being trapped in that room, hearing someone trying to get in. I still get chills when I think about it. Story 6. The Cardston Church. My name is Emma, and this happened back in 2018 when I was 19 and working as a cleaner for a janitorial company in Cardston. One of our contracts was a small church on the south end of town, the Hillside Community Church. It was an older building, built in the 1960s, with a main sanctuary, a few offices, a basement with Sunday school rooms. I worked there every Tuesday and Friday evening after the church closed at 6 p.m. It seemed like an easy gig. What started as routine cleaning shifts quickly became something I'd rather forget. The church was pretty standard for the area. White exterior, peaked roof, small parking lot. The sanctuary could seat maybe 150 people. There was a pastor, Reverend Morris, who was usually there when I arrived. He'd let me in, show me what needed to be done, then leave around 6:30 p.m. After that, I'd be alone in the building until I finished around 8 or 8:30 p.m. For the first month, everything was fine. I'd vacuum the sanctuary, clean the bathrooms, mop the basement floors, take out the trash. Pretty straightforward. The building was quiet, which I actually enjoyed. I'd put in my earbuds and listen to music while I worked. The first time I noticed something was off was on a Friday evening in late October. I was cleaning the sanctuary, vacuuming between the pews, when I heard a door slam somewhere in the building. I stopped and pulled out my earbuds. I called out, "Hello? Reverend Morris." No response. I figured maybe the wind had caught a door or something. I went back to vacuuming. About 10 minutes later, I heard it again. This time I was sure it was the door to the basement. I'd heard that door enough times to recognize the sound. Heavy metal door, loud bang when it closed. I turned off the vacuum and listened. Nothing. I walked over to the basement door and opened it. The lights were off downstairs. I flipped them on and looked down the stairwell. Empty. I told myself maybe I'd left the door open earlier and a draft had closed it. I went back to work. But I remember thinking it was weird, because I hadn't been down to the basement yet that evening. After that night, I started noticing small things. Lights that I'd turned off would be on when I came back to a room. Doors that I'd left open would be closed. Papers on the pastor's desk would be moved. I tried to ignore it, but each time, it got a little harder to brush off. One Friday evening in early November, I was mopping the basement when I heard footsteps upstairs in the sanctuary. Clear, distinct footsteps. Someone was walking across the floor above me. I froze and listened. The footsteps moved from one side of the sanctuary to the other, then stopped. I set down the mop and went upstairs. I checked the sanctuary. Empty. I checked the offices. Empty. I checked the bathrooms. Empty. I was alone in the building. The front and back doors were locked from the inside. No one could have come in without me hearing them. I started feeling uneasy. I decided to finish up quickly and leave. I went back downstairs to grab my cleaning supplies. As I was picking up the mop bucket, I heard a voice. A woman's voice, faint but clear, coming from one of the Sunday school rooms at the end of the hall. She said something I couldn't make out, then laughed. A soft, pleasant laugh. I felt my whole body tense up. I called out, "Hello? Who's there?" The voice stopped. I stood there for a moment, debating whether to investigate or just leave. Against my better judgment, I walked down the hall toward the room where I'd heard the voice. The door was ajar. I pushed it open slowly. The room was empty. Small tables and chairs for kids, some posters on the walls, a bookshelf. Nothing unusual. But the air felt cold, colder than the rest of the basement. I could see my breath. I backed out of the room and decided I was done for the night. I grabbed my stuff and left. I didn't mention it to anyone. I figured if I said something, they'd either think I was crazy or they'd fire me. But then it happened again. The next week, Tuesday evening, I was cleaning one of the offices when I heard piano music coming from the sanctuary. Slow, deliberate notes. Someone was playing the piano. I went to check. The sanctuary was empty, but the piano lid was open. I walked over to it. The keys weren't moving, but I could still hear the music. Faint now, like it was coming from far away. Then it stopped. Just like that. Complete silence. I closed the piano lid and left the sanctuary. I was scared now. Something was happening in this church, and I didn't want to be there alone anymore. I called my supervisor and told her I needed to be reassigned. She asked why. I said the building creeped me out and I didn't feel comfortable being there alone at night. She said she'd see what she could do but couldn't make any promises. And then things went from a 5 to a 10. The following Friday, I was back at the church. My supervisor hadn't found anyone to replace me yet. Reverend Morris let me in, and before he left, I asked him if anyone else had reported strange things happening in the building. He looked at me for a long moment, then asked what I'd experienced. I told him everything: the footsteps, the voices, the piano, the cold rooms. He nodded slowly and said, "Others have mentioned similar things. We've had the building blessed multiple times. Some people believe it's harmless, maybe a former member who passed away and still visits. Nothing to be afraid of." I asked him if he believed that. He said he didn't know, but he'd had his own experiences that he couldn't explain. That didn't make me feel better. He left around 6:30 p.m., and I got to work. I was determined to finish quickly and get out. I started in the sanctuary, then moved to the offices, then headed down to the basement. It was around 7:45 p.m. when it happened. I was in the basement hallway, emptying trash cans, when all the lights went out. Complete darkness. I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight. I called out, "Hello." Nothing. I made my way down the hall toward the stairs, my phone light illuminating just a few feet ahead of me. I was about halfway there when I heard something behind me. Footsteps. Running. Coming toward me fast. I bolted. I ran toward the stairs, stumbled up them two at a time, burst through the door into the main floor. The lights were on up there. I slammed the basement door behind me and stood there, my heart pounding. I held my breath and listened. Nothing. No footsteps. No sounds from the basement. I grabbed my jacket and keys and left immediately. I didn't finish cleaning. I didn't lock up properly. I just left. I called my supervisor from my car and quit on the spot. She tried to talk me out of it, said she'd find someone to go with me next time, but I said no. I was done. I never went back to that church. My supervisor had to send someone else to finish that night's cleaning and take over the contract. I heard later that the new cleaner only lasted 2 weeks before they quit too. Reported the same things: voices, footsteps, lights turning off, feeling like they were being watched. The church ended up hiring a security company to do overnight checks instead of having a single person there alone. I don't know if the activity continued. I never asked. To this day, I avoid that part of Card's Ton. I'll never forget the sound of those footsteps running toward me in the dark. I still get chills when I think about it. Story 7. The Brooks farmhouse. This story happened 2 years ago in the summer of 2022. My name is Tyler, and I was renting a farmhouse outside of Brooks with 2 roommates, my buddy Chris and his girlfriend Melissa. We'd found the place on Kijiji, a 3-bedroom house on 10 acres, cheap rent because it was so far from town. We were all in our mid-20s, working in Brooks at the local meat processing plant. The isolation seemed perfect for saving money. It seemed like a good deal until we realized why the rent was so cheap. The farmhouse was old, probably built in the 1950s or 60s. 2 stories, white clapboard siding, a wraparound porch, barn out back that was falling apart. The nearest neighbor was about 2 miles away. The landlord, an older guy named Frank, said the house had been empty for a year. Previous tenants had broken their lease early. He didn't say why. We moved in on a Saturday in early June. The place needed work, paint peeling, floors creaking, some windows didn't close properly, but it was livable. We spent the first week settling in, fixing small things, getting used to the quiet. Coming from the city, the silence at night took some adjustment. The first time I noticed something was off was about 2 weeks in. I woke up around 3 a.m. to use the bathroom. As I was walking back to my room, I glanced out the hallway window that looked toward the barn. There was a light on inside, just a faint glow visible through the gaps in the old boards. I figured maybe Chris was out there. He'd mentioned wanting to clean out the barn and see if there was anything useful. But it was 3 a.m. I went to his room and knocked quietly. He answered, groggy. I asked if he'd been in the barn. He said no. I told him there was a light on out there. He said maybe we'd left a flashlight on or something. We both went downstairs and looked out the kitchen window. The light was gone. The barn was dark. Chris said it was probably just a reflection or headlights from the road. I said maybe, but the road was over a mile away. We went back to bed, but I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that light. Around 4:30 a.m., I got up again and looked out my bedroom window toward the barn. The light was back. This time I watched it for a few minutes. It was moving, like someone was walking around inside with a lantern. The next morning, I told Chris and Melissa what I'd seen. We walked out to the barn together. The door was padlocked from the outside, same lock we'd seen when we moved in. We opened it and went inside. The barn was empty except for some old farm equipment and hay bales. No lanterns, no flashlights, Nothing that could have produced light. Melissa said maybe it was fireflies or something reflecting off the windows. I said maybe, but I wasn't convinced. We locked the barn back up and went inside. Over the next week, I saw the light 3 more times. Always between 3 and 4 a.m. Always moving around inside the barn. I stopped mentioning it to Chris and Melissa because they seemed to think I was imagining things. But I knew what I was seeing. Then other things started happening. One night, around 11 p.m., we were all in the living room watching TV when we heard footsteps upstairs. Clear, distinct footsteps walking from one end of the hallway to the other. We all looked at each other. Chris said, "Did you hear that?" We all nodded. He grabbed a baseball bat from the closet and we went upstairs together. We checked every room. Empty. No one there. All the windows were closed and locked. No way someone could have gotten in or out. We searched the whole upstairs. Nothing. Melissa was spooked. She said maybe we should call the landlord. Chris said, and tell him what? That we heard footsteps? He'd think we were crazy. We decided to just keep an eye on things. But then it happened again. And again. The footsteps became a nightly occurrence. Always upstairs, always around the same time. Sometimes they'd walk the hallway. Sometimes they'd sound like they were in one of the bedrooms. We got used to it, as weird as that sounds. It became part of the routine. Then things escalated. One night, I was alone in the house. Chris and Melissa had gone into Calgary for the weekend to visit friends. I was in my room reading when I heard the front door open. The distinct sound of the old hinges creaking, then the door closing. I called out, "Chris? Melissa?" No response. I went downstairs. The front door was closed and locked from the inside, same way I'd left it. But I'd heard it open. I was sure of it. I checked the whole house. Empty. I went back upstairs to my room, feeling uneasy. Around midnight, I heard the footsteps again. But this time they were coming up the stairs. Slow, deliberate steps. One at a time. I sat on my bed, my heart racing, listening to them get closer. The footsteps reached the top of the stairs and stopped. I heard my door handle turn. Slowly. I watched it move. The door was locked. The handle stopped turning. I waited. After what felt like forever but was probably only a minute, the footsteps moved away, back down the hallway. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on my bed with my phone in my hand, ready to call 911 if something else happened. Nothing did. But I'll never forget watching that door handle turn. When Chris and Melissa came back Sunday evening, I told them what happened. Melissa said she wanted to move out. Chris said we should at least talk to the landlord first. We called Frank the next day. Frank came over that evening. We told him everything. The lights in the barn, the footsteps, the door handle turning. He listened quietly, then sighed. He said he should have told us before we moved in. The previous tenants had reported the same things. And the tenants before that. He'd had the house sitting empty because he couldn't keep anyone there longer than a few months. He said he didn't know what was causing it. Some people thought the house was haunted. The property had been in his family for generations. His grandfather had built the house and barn back in the 1950s. His grandmother had died in the house in the late 1980s. Some people thought maybe it was her. Frank offered to let us out of the lease with no penalty if we wanted to leave. Melissa said yes immediately. Chris and I agreed. We gave our 30 days notice and started looking for a new place. But those last 30 days were rough. And then things went from a 7 to a 10. It was about 3 weeks before we were scheduled to move out. I woke up around 2:30 a.m. to a sound I'd never heard before. Scratching. Coming from inside the walls. Not like mice or rats. This was loud, aggressive scratching. Like someone was clawing at the drywall from the other side. I got up and followed the sound. It was coming from the wall in the hallway. I put my ear against it. The scratching was intense now, frantic. Then I heard something else. A voice, muffled, coming from inside the wall. It said something I couldn't make out. Then it said, clearer this time, get out. I felt my whole body tense up. I backed away from the wall. The scratching stopped. The voice stopped. I went to Chris and Melissa's room and knocked. Chris answered. I told him what I'd heard. He said he'd heard it too. They both had. We stood in the hallway listening. Nothing now. Just silence. We decided we weren't waiting the full 30 days. We'd move out as soon as we could find a new place. That weekend, we found a rental in Brooks proper and gave Frank our keys. We packed up and left within 5 days. None of us went back. I heard from Frank about 6 months later. He'd decided to demolish the house. Said he couldn't deal with the liability of tenants leaving constantly, and he couldn't live with knowing something was wrong with the place and continuing to rent it out. The house and barn were torn down in early 2023. To this day, I still don't know what was in that farmhouse. Whether it was something paranormal or just the house settling in strange ways, I'll never know for sure. But I'll never forget that voice in the wall telling us to get out. I still get chills when I think about it. Story 8. The Clairsham gas station. My name is Rachel, and this happened last year when I was working night shifts at a Petro-Canada in Clairsham. I was 21, taking a year off school, and needed a job. The gas station was one of those 24-hour places right off Highway 2, the kind where you mainly get truckers and travelers passing through. The night shift paid an extra $1.50 an hour, and I needed the money. It seemed like an easy job: sit at the counter, ring up purchases, restock shelves. It seemed straightforward until I met the regular who came in every night at exactly 3:17 a.m. The gas station was pretty standard. For pumps outside, a small convenience store inside with snacks, drinks, a coffee station, and a single bathroom in the back. I worked Thursday through Sunday nights, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. The day shift woman, Linda, would brief me on anything I needed to know before she left. She mentioned we got some regular customers on the night shift. Truckers mostly, a few locals who worked odd hours. The first week went smoothly. I'd get a handful of customers each night, usually between midnight and 4 a.m. By 5 a.m. things would pick up a bit with people heading to work. I'd spend the quiet hours cleaning, restocking, watching shows on my phone. Pretty easy. The first time I noticed something was off was my second Friday night, around 3 a.m. I was restocking the chip aisle when the door chime rang. I called out, "Be right there," and finished what I was doing. When I got to the counter, there was a man standing there. Older, maybe 60s, wearing a grey jacket and jeans. He had a coffee and a chocolate bar on the counter. I rang him up. He paid cash, exact change. As I handed him his receipt, he looked at me and said, "You're new?" I said yes, started about a week ago. He nodded slowly and said, "Be careful." I asked what he meant. He didn't answer. He just took his coffee and chocolate bar and left. I watched him walk out to the parking lot. He got into an old pickup truck and drove off. I thought the interaction was odd but didn't think much of it. People say weird things sometimes. The next night, same thing. 3:17 a.m. exactly. The door chime rang. Same man, same grey jacket, same order, coffee and a chocolate bar. I rang him up. He said, "Still here?" I said yes. He said, "Good luck," and left. This continued every night I worked. Always at 3:17 a.m. Always the same order. Always a strange comment. Be careful. Watch yourself. Don't trust what you see. I started to feel uncomfortable. On my fourth shift, I asked Linda about him when she came in for the day shift. I described the man, older, grey jacket, drives an old pickup. Linda's face went pale. She asked what time he comes in. I said 3:17 a.m. every night. She was quiet for a moment, then said, "That's impossible." I asked why. She said, "Because that man died 3 years ago." I thought she was messing with me. I said no, I've seen him every night this week. She shook her head and pulled out her phone. She showed me a news article from August 2020. A man named Robert Hendricks, age 63, had been killed in a single vehicle accident on Highway 2 just south of Cleshome. He'd been a regular at the gas station, came in every night around 3 a.m. for coffee. The accident happened at 3:17 a.m. The photo in the article was him, the man I'd been serving. I felt my hands start shaking. Linda said other people had reported seeing him over the years, always at night, always at 3:17 a.m., always the same order. But no one could ever explain it. She said most new employees quit after they found out. She asked if I wanted to quit. I said I'd think about it. That night, I was dreading 3:17 a.m. I told myself maybe Linda was wrong, maybe it was a different person, maybe the photo just looked similar. But at 3:16 a.m., I watched the clock. The minute changed to 3:17. The door chime rang. He walked in. Same grey jacket. Went straight to the coffee station, poured a cup, grabbed a chocolate bar from the rack. He came to the counter. I rang him up, my hands trembling. He paid exact change. As I handed him the receipt, he looked at me and said, "Tonight's the night." I asked what he meant. He said, "Stay inside. No matter what you hear." Then he walked out. I watched him get into his truck and drive away. I stood there for a minute trying to process what just happened. Stay inside. No matter what I hear. What did that mean? I tried to keep working, but I was on edge. Every sound made me jump. Around 4 a.m., I heard a car pull up outside. I looked out the window. A newer model sedan, dark blue. A man got out and started pumping gas. Normal enough. But then he finished pumping and just stood there by his car, staring at the building. Staring at me through the window. He didn't come inside to pay. He just stood there. I called out through the intercom, "Sir, you need to come inside to pay." He didn't move. I waited a few minutes. He still didn't move. Just kept staring. I started to feel uneasy. I called out again. Nothing. I decided to call the RCMP non-emergency line. While I was on the phone with them, explaining the situation, the man finally moved. He got back in his car and drove off without paying. The dispatcher said an officer would come check on me and review the security footage to get the license plate. The officer arrived about 20 minutes later. We reviewed the footage together. The man had pumped 47 worth of gas and drove off. The officer got the plate number and said they'd follow up. But that wasn't the unsettling part. The unsettling part was what the officer said next. He said they'd been getting reports of cars being stopped on Highway 2 near Cleshome late at night. People pretending to need help, then attempting to rob or assault drivers who stopped. He said there'd been 2 incidents in the past month. He suggested I keep the doors locked and only let customers in one at a time during the night shift if I felt unsafe. That made me realize what Robert Hendricks, or whoever that was, had been warning me about. Stay inside. No matter what you hear. Maybe he knew something was going to happen that night. Around 5:30 a.m., I heard someone banging on the glass door. Loud, aggressive banging. I looked over. It was a different man this time, younger, maybe 30s. He was yelling something I couldn't make out. I called out through the intercom that we're open, he can come in. He banged again. Then I realized the door was locked. I hadn't locked it. It locks automatically at night unless you override it. But I never set it to automatic lock. And Linda said it had been broken for weeks, stuck in the manual position. Yet here it was, locked. The man outside banged a few more times, then walked back to his vehicle, a van parked off to the side, and drove away fast. I checked the door. It was definitely locked. From the inside. I unlocked it and tested it. It wouldn't lock automatically no matter what I tried. Someone or something had locked it manually. But I was alone in the store. The rest of the shift passed without incident. When Linda came in at 7 a.m., I told her everything. She said I should quit. She said this kind of thing had happened before: strange people showing up, the door locking on its own, Robert Hendricks giving warnings. She said the gas station had a reputation for being protected in some way, but that it came with weirdness. I worked 2 more shifts before I quit. Both nights, Robert Hendricks came in at 3:17 a.m. Both nights, he said something cryptic. "You're safe here. Don't leave until sunrise." I took his advice. I never left the building during my shifts, even to take out the trash. And nothing bad happened those nights. But I couldn't deal with the stress. I quit and found a day job at a grocery store. I never worked nights again. To this day, I don't know if Robert Hendricks was a ghost or if I was experiencing some kind of shared hallucination with Linda and the other employees. But the warnings he gave me were real. And the things that happened, the man staring, the door locking, the aggressive banging, those were real too. I still drive past that gas station sometimes during the day when I'm on Highway 2. I never stop there. I'll never forget that feeling of being watched through the window at 4 a.m. And I'll never forget Robert Hendricks' face. Part of me wishes I knew more about why he was still there, but another part is glad I don't. I still get chills when I think about it. Story 9. The Vulcan warehouse. This story happened 3 years ago in the fall of 2021. My name is Jason, and I was working as a delivery driver for a regional distributor based out of Calgary. One of my regular routes took me through small towns in southern Alberta, dropping off supplies to hardware stores, feed shops, and small businesses. One stop was a warehouse in Vulcan that stored agricultural equipment and supplies. I'd been there maybe a dozen times over the previous year. It seemed like any other warehouse. What started as a routine delivery became something I'll never forget. The warehouse was on the outskirts of Vulcan, down a gravel road about half a mile from the main highway. Big metal building, probably 10,000 square feet, with a small office attached to the front. The company that owned it, Prairie Supply Company, used it for storage and distribution. There were usually 1 or 2 people working there during the day, but they'd often leave by 4 or 5 p.m. I was scheduled to make a delivery there on a Wednesday afternoon in late September. I'd left Calgary around 1 p.m. and hit traffic, so I didn't arrive until almost 5:30 p.m. The sun was starting to set. I pulled up to the warehouse and saw that the main office lights were off. I tried the front door, locked. I walked around to the loading dock at the back. The bay door was partially open, maybe 2 feet from the ground. I knocked on the metal door and called out, "Hello? Delivery from Calgary." No response. I checked my phone. I had the right address, right day. I called the warehouse number. No answer. I decided to leave the pallets by the loading dock and take a photo as proof of delivery. But I needed a signature or confirmation from someone inside. I ducked under the bay door and stepped into the warehouse. It was dark except for some emergency exit lights near the back. I called out again, "Hello? Anyone here?" The warehouse was huge. Rows of metal shelving units, pallets stacked with boxes, agricultural equipment covered with tarps. The air smelled like oil and dust. I walked down the main aisle looking for an office or anyone who worked there. About halfway through, I found a small glass office booth. Empty. The lights were off, computer monitors dark. I tried the warehouse phone on the desk. No dial tone. I pulled out my cell phone to call my dispatcher and let them know no one was here to receive the delivery. No signal. That was odd. I'd had signal outside. I decided to just leave. I'd take photos of the delivery spot and let my dispatcher handle it. As I turned to walk back toward the loading dock, I heard something. A sound coming from the back of the warehouse. Like metal scraping against concrete. I stopped and listened. The sound came again. Scrape. Pause. Scrape. Like someone was dragging something heavy across the floor. I called out, "Hello? Is someone back there?" No response. Just the scraping sound, getting closer. I started walking back toward the loading dock, moving quickly. The scraping followed me, echoing through the warehouse. I couldn't tell exactly where it was coming from, The acoustics made it seem like it was all around me. I picked up my pace, almost jogging now. I got to the loading dock and ducked under the bay door, back outside. I stood there catching my breath, looking back into the dark warehouse. The scraping had stopped. I waited a minute. Nothing. I loaded the pallets onto my dolly and left them by the door. I took photos and got back in my truck. As I was pulling away, I looked in my rearview mirror. I saw a figure standing in the warehouse doorway. Tall, dark silhouette. Just standing there watching me leave. I felt my whole body tense up. I drove back to the main highway and called my dispatcher. I told them what happened. They said they'd contact the company and reschedule the delivery. The next day, my dispatcher called me. She said she'd spoken with someone from Prairie Supply Company. They said no one had been at the warehouse yesterday after 3 p.m. The building was locked and empty. She asked if I was sure I saw someone. I said yes, I saw someone in the doorway when I was leaving. She said the company wanted to check their security footage. They had cameras at the loading dock. I said fine, go ahead. She called me back an hour later. She said the footage showed me arriving, ducking under the bay door, leaving a few minutes later, and driving away. But it didn't show anyone else. No figure in the doorway. Nothing. I didn't know what to say. I knew what I saw. She said the company suggested maybe it was shadows or a trick of the light. I didn't argue. But I knew what I saw. A week later, I had another delivery scheduled for the same warehouse. I told my dispatcher I didn't want to go back there. She asked why. I said I just didn't feel comfortable. She said she'd send someone else. The driver who took that delivery was a guy named Marcus, someone I'd worked with for years. Good guy, level-headed. He made the delivery without incident. But the next week, when I saw him at the depot, he pulled me aside. He asked me if anything weird had happened when I was at the Vulcan warehouse. I told him about my experience. He nodded and said, "Same thing happened to me. I heard someone walking around in there. Metal footsteps, like someone wearing work boots. But I couldn't find anyone. And when I left, I saw someone standing in the warehouse watching me." We compared notes. Same warehouse. Same sounds. Same figure watching from the doorway. Marcus said he'd asked around and found out 2 other drivers had reported similar things over the past couple of years. The company knew about it but didn't want to make a big deal of it because they'd lose drivers willing to go out there. Marcus and I both refused to make deliveries there after that. We told management either they assign it to someone else or would find work somewhere else. They reassigned it. I don't know if other drivers experienced the same things. I never asked. But here's the part that really got to me. About 6 months after my initial visit, I was talking to a friend who grew up in Vulcan. I mentioned the warehouse, asked if she knew anything about it. Her face got serious. She said the land the warehouse was built on used to be a farm. Back in the 1970s, a farm worker had died there in an accident involving heavy machinery. Got crushed under a piece of equipment. The farm was sold after that, and eventually the warehouse was built. Some locals believed the property was haunted. They said the worker's spirit was still there, angry about what happened. Workers at the warehouse over the years had reported tools going missing, equipment turning on by itself, and seeing a figure walking around at night. I'd never believed in ghosts before that experience. I still don't know if that's what I encountered. But I know what I heard and what I saw. And I know Marcus experienced the same thing. To this day, I avoid that warehouse. If I'm ever driving through Vulcan, I take a different route. I'll never forget that scraping sound in the dark, or the figure watching me from the doorway. I still get chills when I think about it. Story 10. The High River apartment. My name is Nicole, and this happened 2 years ago when I was 23 and living alone for the first time. I'd just gotten a job in High River and found a small apartment above a used bookstore on the main street. It was cheap rent, close to work, and seemed perfect for someone just starting out. The landlord, an older woman named Dorothy who owned the bookstore below, said the apartment had been empty for a few months. She didn't say why. What seemed like a great first apartment quickly became something I'd rather forget. The apartment was small, 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, a combined kitchen and living area. Hardwood floors that creaked, old radiators for heat, windows that overlooked the main street. The building itself was from the early 1900s, renovated multiple times over the years. It had that old building character, high ceilings, crown molding, but also drafts and odd sounds. I moved in on a Saturday in March. Dorothy helped me carry boxes upstairs and gave me a quick tour. She mentioned the bookstore was closed on Sundays and Mondays, so it would be quiet those days. She lived in a house a few blocks away, but stopped by the store most mornings to check on things. The first week was fine. I unpacked, set up my furniture, got used to the space. The apartment was quiet during the day when the bookstore was open below. At night, I could hear the occasional car passing on the street, but otherwise it was peaceful. The first time I noticed something was off was about 10 days after I moved in. It was a Sunday, so the bookstore was closed. I was home alone working on my laptop around 2 p.m. when I heard something downstairs. Footsteps. Someone was walking around in the bookstore below me. I could hear the old wooden floorboards creaking with each step. I assumed it was Dorothy. Maybe she'd come in to work on inventory or something. The footsteps continued for maybe 5 minutes, walking from one end of the store to the other. Then they stopped. I went back to work. Later that evening, I texted Dorothy to thank her for being a great landlord. She replied asking what I meant. I said I just wanted to let her know I appreciated her being around. She said she hadn't been to the store that day, had been at home all day with her sister visiting from Calgary. I felt a chill. I asked if anyone else had keys to the store. She said no, just her. I told her I'd heard someone walking around downstairs that afternoon. There was a long pause before she replied. She said she'd come by tomorrow morning to check things out. I said okay, trying not to seem alarmed. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed thinking about those footsteps. Around midnight, I heard them again. Slow, deliberate footsteps walking through the bookstore below. Back and forth, back and forth. I got up and pressed my ear to the floor. The sounds were clear. Someone was definitely down there. I called Dorothy. She didn't answer. I thought about calling the police, but what would I say? I heard footsteps. They'd think I was paranoid. I grabbed a flashlight and quietly went downstairs to the door that connected my apartment to the bookstore. It was locked from my side. I unlocked it and opened it slowly. The bookstore was dark. I shined my flashlight around. Rows of bookshelves, a checkout counter near the front, reading chairs in the back. Everything looked normal. I stepped down into the store. The footsteps had stopped. I walked through the aisles, checking every corner. No one. The front door was locked from the inside. All the windows were closed and locked. I went back upstairs and locked the connecting door. I sat on my couch with the lights on for the rest of the night. At 8 a.m., Dorothy arrived. I let her in and told her everything. She listened quietly, then said, "I was afraid of this." She sat down and explained. The previous tenant had moved out after 2 months because of the footsteps. And the tenant before that. She'd had 3 tenants in the past 2 years. None stayed longer than a few months. They all reported the same thing: footsteps in the bookstore at night when it was supposed to be empty. Dorothy said she'd owned the building for 15 years. The footsteps started about 5 years ago. She'd had the store blessed, had paranormal investigators come in, even tried to sell the building. Nothing helped. The investigators said they detected presence but couldn't explain it. One of them suggested it might be a former owner or employee who died and still visited the store. I asked Dorothy why she didn't tell me this before I moved in. She said she didn't think the footsteps would bother me if I didn't know about them. She said some tenants never heard them. She offered to let me out of my lease if I wanted to leave. I thought about it but decided to stay. I needed the cheap rent and I'd just moved all my stuff in. I figured I could deal with some footsteps. They weren't hurting anyone. Just unsettling. But then things escalated. 2 weeks later, I was home on a Monday evening around 9 p.m. I was in the kitchen making dinner when I heard a door slam. I looked over. My bedroom door had just slammed shut. I walked over and opened it. The window in my room was closed. No draft that could have caused it. I told myself maybe it was just the old building settling. But then it happened again. And again. Over the next few days, doors would slam randomly. The bathroom door, the bedroom door, kitchen cabinets would open on their own. Lights would flicker. I started feeling like I wasn't alone in the apartment, like someone was watching me. I'd be sitting on the couch and feel a presence behind me. I'd turn around, nothing. I'd be in the shower and hear someone walking in the apartment. I'd get out and check, no one there. One night, around 2 a.m., I woke up to my bedroom door opening slowly. I watched it creak open inch by inch. I felt my whole body tense up. I called out, "Who's there?" The door stopped moving. Then it slammed shut so hard the picture frames on my wall rattled. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight. I got out of bed and opened the door. The apartment was empty. I checked every room, every closet. Nothing. I called Dorothy. She didn't answer. It was 2 a.m. I left a voicemail saying I needed to talk to her as soon as possible. The next morning, Dorothy came over. I told her what was happening. Doors slamming, cabinets opening, feeling watched, my bedroom door opening on its own. She looked worried. She said the activity had never been this intense before. Previous tenants had only reported footsteps. She suggested I might want to move out. She'd refund my deposit and let me out of the lease immediately. I said yes. I couldn't live there anymore. The stress and lack of sleep were affecting my work and my mental health. I packed up my stuff that weekend and moved in with a coworker temporarily until I found a new place. Dorothy ended up sealing off the apartment. She said she wouldn't rent it out anymore, didn't want to put anyone else through what I'd experienced. She still owns the bookstore, but the upstairs apartment remains empty. To this day, I still don't know what was in that apartment or in the bookstore below. Whether it was paranormal or something else, I'll never know for sure. But I'll never forget watching my bedroom door open on its own that night, or the constant feeling of being watched. I still get chills when I think about it. I never went back. I avoid that street when I'm in High River.